So the news that George Gibney, the former swim coach, has been arrested in Florida, it was really, it's really been a long time coming, I suppose.
Yeah, it has. So I suppose 30 years really from the time that he was initially charged before court, and then that was overturned because he took a judicial review in the High Court. But yeah, it's been a long time. Like, these allegations are back from the 90s, between the 70s and these allegations, they were made in the 90s, but they date back to between the period of the 70s and 80s. So, and he's been out of the country for 30 years. So for the people who have come forward, it's been a long, long time coming.
So George Gibney, of course, he's become sort of synonymous with the podcast, whereas George Gibney in recent times, the BBC podcast. And maybe some of the younger listeners might not remember him, but, it was a huge, huge story at the time.
Yeah.
The allegations that were made against George Gibney and other people who were also involved in swimming coaching.
Yeah.
And it was one of those kind of watershed moments in Irish society, equivalent to some of the allegations made against priests, because it was the first time some of this stuff became public.
Yeah.
What were what was the timeline of that? I mean, the first sort of allegations came out in the early 90s, I think, initially.
Yeah. So, it was, because I suppose they think this is Ireland in the 80s, 90s. So, this would have been the time where, authority figures were seen with the utmost trust, and George Gibney was a huge figure. He was on the Late Late. He was on a lot of TV shows around the world. He was a renowned swim coach, known for his abilities, and I think he'd been coaching since the 60s, but in the 80s then he was appointed the head Ireland coach for swimming, and he was seen as kind of revolutionary. He was going to really change things there. He did 2 Olympic Games, I think, and he coached really well-known swimming stars such as Gary O'Toole. So it was in the 90s that the charges were put to him, and he was brought before court, but the allegations date from the 80s. And the original case, it was in 1993. This would have been seen as bombshell to all the parents who knew him. And basically he was accused of 27 counts of indecent assault. I think there was also a carnal knowledge of young girls among the charges as well. And essentially in 1994 it was ruled that because of the passage of time, basically the charges were too old, and because there was a lack of detail on some of the charges, there was a judicial High Court review taken by George Gibney's legal team, and then it was upheld by the Supreme Court, so the charges were dropped. And then it also meant later on in the 90s the Gardaí tried to bring more charges against him, but it's because of the law back then, it's kind of changed now. It meant that they couldn't actually charge him. It had to be new evidence. There had to be new allegations essentially for a new case to be brought, and that's what essentially happened in the wake of the, as you said, really, really, really high profile BBC podcast, Where is George Gibney?
So in the meantime, after this case went to the Supreme Court, George Gibney left Ireland and, he disappeared. Ultimately, I think he ended up in Florida, but I think he went via Scotland at one point. Now, those charges that you speak about, unlawful carnal knowledge and indecent assault, those charges are old charges. So the criminal statutes have been updated in the meantime. Those charges don't exist, but you still have to be charged with the old charges because of when they occurred. There's no particular statute of legislation regarding crimes in Ireland, but obviously he won that court case, and that was dropped. Now, Gary O'Toole, of course, has been very public about what he learned about some of his. Gary O'Toole was a huge star back in the 90s.
Yeah.
One of the most famous sports people in Ireland. Really very, very successful swimmer, but also very accomplished in the media. Like, what was his role in kind of bringing this all to public? So
Gary O'Toole had come out before. So I suppose these allegations came to light again with the really, really acclaimed podcast by the BBC team, Where is George Gibney? Gary O'Toole was, as you said, on the Irish swim team. He, before the likes of Daniel Whiffen and Mona McSharry came along in recent years, he was probably one of our greatest ever swimmers in terms of success. And he had told the story that he was on his way, he was on a plane to one of the, I think it might have been the Olympics in the early 90s. And he was sitting beside, he would have been an assistant coach on the Irish swim team at the time. His name was Chalky White. And basically Chalky White asked him, had George Gibney ever abused him? And he said no. And then Chalky White told Gary O'Toole that of his story where he said he was abused by George Gibney. And then Gary O'Toole kind of told how things started to fall into place then. And he actually told on the podcast a story about this girl. He was really, really friendly with the girl. She was a fellow swimmer on the same team. And he went away, I think, for a summer. He went away for his swimming, and they were staying in touch, and then gradually she kind of became very distant, and he could never understand why. And then when he heard these allegations from Chalky White, things started to drop into place. And then he sent a letter to this girl, and she basically got back in touch with him. This was years later, and she was one of the people who spoke in the podcast, and she has made allegations against George Gibney. So that's when Gary O'Toole learned all of this stuff about George Gibney, and he approached him, and he was head coach at Trojan Swimming Club after he stepped down from the Irish setup. And he approached him and he told how George Gibney made him wait for a long time on the side of the pool. And when he eventually came up, he told him, I'm leaving. And he said, George Gibney looked really shocked, and he said, why? And he said, you know why?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of the that was obviously Gary O'Toole sort of approaching him. And then the charges came afterwards. Yeah.
Unravelled for Gibney. Now, he left for Florida. Obviously, then over the years, people have done stories about him. I mean, the Sunday World on at least 2 occasions in between the BBC podcast and Gibney leaving the country, we, I suppose, tracked him down and sort of gave an update on what his life had been like in Florida. On one occasion, I think back in the 2000s, we found out he was working in a hotel. He was subsequently fired after the hotel learned about his past. Mm. And on another occasion, we tracked him down to an area in Florida where he was living with a housemate, I suppose, a guy called Pedro Collin, who's lived with him for, I'm not sure, but well over a decade. They're described as housemates. People in the local area didn't know much about him. Pedro Collin is, what would you describe him as? Is a software engineer. He's also in his late 70s, like George Gibney is now. So obviously he looked like, he was not facing any criminal charges. So he's an innocent man floating about, getting on with his life. What exactly his status over there was, I don't know if we ever fully knew if he'd become a citizen or of the US or anything like that. I don't think he had. But
I think he'd applied for a visa in 1992, I believe, which was before the charges were brought in Ireland. So, and then when things were dropped, that visa came through. So he obviously went on that. And then there was talk of him getting a green card, but we don't know now. We assume he's there 30 years, so we don't know.
Yeah, but look, he's living with this man for a long time anyway. So then the podcast comes out and people come forward, basically. Now, we've heard details of what exactly he's charged with, because he was arrested, obviously, in Florida this week. But that was on the back of a warrant being issued by the Dublin District Court.
Yeah, so essentially these allegations, there was a crime review team in the Gardaí were put together to deal with these allegations from women who had taken part in the Where's George Gibney podcast. So this would have been like around 2021. And they sent a file to the DPP requesting that George Gibney be charged with these offences. And then I think that was approved by the DPP in the last couple of years. So there was obviously probably concern that George Gibney, he has moved around America. There's been attempts over the years to door knock him, and it was in California at one point. He's in different places. So I don't know if there was concern that he may not stay if he knew that there was a warrant, but essentially DPP proves these charges, and there was a warrant sent to an embassy, the Irish embassy in Washington, and requesting his arrest. Obviously, the Florida authorities were made aware, and he was arrested last week, and he's appeared in court where he's been charged with 79 offences, alleged offences, 1 count of attempted rape and 78 counts of indecent assault. Obviously, they're looking for his extradition back to Ireland to face these charges, but these were called out. These were put to him by a judge in a court in Florida.
So they all refer to the time frame of the offence, the alleged offences are 1971 to 1974, and it's believed, is it 4 women have come forward?
Yeah, so 4 women have come forward, and these are new allegations. So these are separate to the cases back in 1990s, and they all come from people that had taken part in the podcast. They went to the Gardaí. The Gardaí followed them up and referred to DPP, who confirmed charges should be made. So these women have, according to court papers filed in the US, they've made allegations that they were abused by George Gibney across that 10-year period, in cars, in swim club, dressing rooms, in offices, in houses as well. It was actually alleged that some of them happened every week. So these are some of the allegations that are being made. So he has appeared in court, and as you said, obviously he will be charged in Ireland, but these charges are put to him in the court. Yeah,
the basic, I suppose, extradition sort of proceedings we'd have with the US, where we have treaties and arrangements in place. But he can only be extradited if a court in Ireland want you to charge you, and that's what the Dublin District Court have issued these charges effectively. In America, he's in the US now. He's due to appear in court, I think, next week again. At the end of next week, where he can resist the extradition. But the hearing, it would be that he would be held in Ireland, and he would be due to be flown back to face those charges.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess we don't know. We assume that he's going to fight the extradition, as a lot of people do, and obviously he has a track record for moving around, for not wanting to. He refused to cooperate with Gardaí in past times. Any journalist that has approached him, he's refused to speak in recent years. So we assume that he will try and fight this extradition. So we'll see what will come of it next.
And do we know if he's been held on bail or released on bail, or has that been said?
I think he was remanded in custody.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He was. Yeah.
So we'll follow it up when he appears in court next Friday, and maybe more details will emerge at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Eimear.
Thanks, Matt.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.